Hello everyone to the first Cinder Midcycle of the Z development release. Uh, and this is the R18 week, and we decided to keep this meeting on June 1st, which is today. So it will be held for next 2 hours. Uh, and I've shared the Etherpad and also this meeting link in the Cinder channel. But still, if you see someone asking in the channel for the link, please do share with them and uh, let them know they can join the meeting. Okay. Going into the Etherpad, I see the first topic is an icebreaker. I think it was added by you, Brian.
Yeah, so there's this conversation going on about changing the line length. So it looks like all the people are against it, which is perfectly okay with me. But I thought I'd bring it up in case anyone, because I've always worried about whether I'm just like hidebound and reactionary in my development preferences, and I want the windows to be exactly the size they are now. So um, anyway, so I'm perfectly okay with this, but I was just curious if anybody else had an opinion.
Well, I sure do. Terminals are exactly 80 characters and no more. I don't understand why in the world you would increase that. That's just crazy. Crazy.
Well, if you look at the Python and at the Cinder Python code, you see a lot of 3 lines things that we start dividing. I agree that we need a limit, but 80 may be a little bit small for the names that we use and the code that we end up having in Cinder. Because since we are forced to, everything needs to be tabulated in Python. Indented, sorry. Then we end up having problems with readability. At least for me, sometimes it's not easy to read things.
Yeah, I actually agree. I'm not opposed to increasing it. I don't know. Some people have very strong opinions, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, there are definitely cases in the code where like things wrap and it's harder to read. But I don't know. Like I guess it depends on your development environment. If you're coding on a small screen or with a large font, or I don't know, with 80 characters, like wrapping is can be painful to read as well. So I suspect no one's there's I don't know. Everyone's gonna have a different opinion about it.
Biggest downside that I see is reviewing side-by-side diffs.
Yeah, the guy who proposed this put up a patch in Garrett. I got to go back and change my settings. That has the 219 long lines just to see. And I was surprised that it actually does fit on my laptop screen side by side. So that might not be such a concern. But I usually have like 5 or 6 code windows open in Emacs, of course. That's how reactionary I am. And so then I like 80 because I can easily see them all. But I was just curious about what other people think.
I like 82, and I'll keep using that. But like I'm not gonna. I wouldn't get bent out of shape if it increased. I don't think. I think there are other projects that do this as well.
Yeah, and I think that the big thing I see is I could just imagine a zillion patches changing the line length of all our code, right?
Yeah.
Right. So.
Yeah, that's a -2 for me.
Right.
Because I am still feeling the pain from the SQL Alchemy changes.
I know. I'm sorry about that. But my plan with that was to just, if we got them merged really fast, then it wouldn't cause as much trouble, even though it was ugly. But, what can you do? So I apologize sort of like half-heartedly for that one.
Yeah, well, it was
Yeah,
painful
no.
but necessary.
Yeah.
Well, not really necessary, because
I know,
many of the
right.
changes were even against what we do in Cinder. It's like we have all our code formatted in a specific way, and suddenly the database files are completely different. It was like, oh, come on. But
Well,
yeah,
yeah, I think part of that though is going to be helpful for the MyPy in there because right, all the arguments or the parameters are stacked up now. So that's how I sold it to myself so that I didn't feel bad. All right. So anyway, it seems like I haven't weighed in on that argument, but it looks like everybody's minus wanting the idea. So
My
I mean,
doubt
80,
regarding this was,
I was just going to say 80 may not be the best choice, but we've been living with it for how many years now, and to change now, then we're going to see like files with hybrid code, most of it formatted for 80, and then, the ones that aren't are going to stand out like a sore thumb. And
I say stick with
that
80.
actually for me is a very good reason not to do it. I didn't have any reason because I actually prefer a little bit longer lines in our code base, given the wrapping that we do. But that is a very good reason not to have it because it's going to be inconsistent. You're going to prepare your environment to read 80 lines, and suddenly, like John was saying, things wrap automatically or don't wrap, and you need to slide or whatever. Yep, not great.
basically my doubt was regarding, are we talking about new code that would accept this limit, or their proposal is to change the existing code as well?
well, it's one of those things. I think once we start doing it on new code, some jokers are going to come through with patches changing everything.
But it sounds like
So
we're rejecting it all completely, right? So that won't be an issue.
yeah, yeah. Right. So as long as we say no, I think everything's fine. It's when you say yes that, the whole can of worms opens up.
Yeah, and I think this could be probably the 5th time somebody tries to change the length. Unlikely to happen. Maybe we can just keep a page with each retry.
No.
Yeah, we could have progress reports and create some nice bar charts on how far they get and at what point they get shut down. We put it in Grafana, make it look nice. Sorry.
moving on.
Yes, it looks like everyone is against this. So okay, so the next topic is again by Brian. It was a deft work from the PTG, so we didn't have enough time to complete this. This is regarding volume encryption.
Yeah. Okay. So I didn't really prepare again, but the basic thing is Gorka's been doing a bunch of fixes. So it's so encryption's been broken with some of the OS brick connectors. So question is, so we should probably improve our encryption tests. But Gorka was also thinking maybe we should add an encryption section to the support matrix, sort of as a motivator for people to make sure that this is tested. So I guess this is kind of, so anyway, so that's the basic idea. I mean, I haven't looked at this, the current tests we've got. Yeah, the current Tempest, well, the current everything tests are linked in the Etherpad. So it's the Cinder encryption tests, and they're not very robust. I mean, most of them just create a volume and connect to it and detach, and that's it. So we don't know that they connected properly, or that if you reattached them, something wouldn't break. So yeah, so I guess the main thing for us here, so there's the question of like who's going to do the tests and add them. But then there's the other thing, do we want this idea of an encrypted section in the support matrix to indicate that the backend has been tested? But I guess in order for that to actually happen, we got to have the tests for them to pass. But we can at least get started working on that.
Okay, you're not audible. Beats me, but I can't hear you.
That's a bummer if we can't hear. Oh, he's going to reconnect. I wonder if he's updated his operating system recently, because it used to work. It's been relatively recent, I think, that BlueJeans hasn't worked for Gorka.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I switch browsers and yeah, whatever. I lost part of the conversation, and you were saying about our tests, right? The encryption test, but even if they are weak, the ones that we currently have, we do have some that could be run, right? So we could potentially add, like you say, the capability in our table encryption has been tested and it's supported. And as we add more tests, they just will, if suddenly breaks the new test, they will have to fix their driver. So
Okay. All right. That's a good point. And then the other thing was, so I don't know a lot about the fixed key encryption. Because I mean, some drivers have explicitly not turned on the encryption tests because they don't want to enable Barbican and all that stuff. So if there's a way to still test without having to have Barbican, then there's no excuse for that.
yep, you can test. You can still use fixed key.
Okay.
That's how I usually test with Deprecate
Locally.
to play around. Fixed key, and good to go.
Okay.
And for the part that we really care as a driver and as OS break, that's the important part.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, I'll take an action item to do something. All right. So what I'll do is write up something for the mailing list, I guess, saying that we want to do this and that drivers need to start running the tests. And then I guess we should go ahead and propose how do we want to handle the support matrix? I guess we should give them time to tell them it's coming and give them time to get ready for it. So we can say that we're going to do it in go ahead.
We could propose a batch, adding it, and just add in, for example, if we have it enabled in LVM and Ceph backends, and we confirm that those tests pass, the initial patch that it has a -1 on as a work in progress only has those two. And like you say, we give them a bit of time, and we can iterate on that patch until the period passes. And then we merge that, and any other driver will need to an additional patch.
Okay.
That way it's clear that it's going to happen because the patch is there and the driver does not appear in that list. And we give them time so that they don't look bad initially because they are not on the list.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. Let me
We do have some encryption test in Cinder Tempest plugin right now.
Yeah, so we've got two sets, and the scenario test looks pretty good. I'm not sure how many people are running that though, but that will get us some. All right, so make sure LVM and RBD. Um, I was going to say all community drivers, but I believe there's a problem with NFS, but I'm not sure. So let's leave
Yeah,
that for now.
NFS is not yet. It's not there yet.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I'm going to stop talking because I already got myself lots of more work to do than I was planning. So we can move on. All right. That sounds good. So I think, and then we'll just continue to add tests as we can and just occasionally verify that the regex that the third-party CIs are using picks them up. So shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, one thing we can do is whenever we find a bug in encryption, which is kind of scary, given the fact that when you use encryption, it's because it's very important. We require a tempest test that fills the gap of that. It's painful, usually, because you start having dependency between the patches. I detected the lux v2 issue, and that requires a Nova patch, or a break patch, that is the Tempest patch, so 3 patches, and it's painful to get them all 3 merged to actually be able to run things. But that's the only way to make sure that we don't regress and that we actually do things. Right.
So here when we mention LVM, are we talking about the iSCSI or with NVMe as well? Because I think Gorka, you noticed some issues with NVMe and encryption.
Yeah, the new, if I am ever able to merge the DevStack patch and the OSBreak patches and the Cinder patches, the idea is to add a job that will run actually NVMe, and we would also have to enable the fixed key, at the very least, the fixed key encryption test in that job, because we want to make sure that we actually test everything. So that we follow what we preach. We tell third-party CIs you have to test encryption. So, like Brian said, all community drivers that support encryption should have it. The NFS one doesn't support it, so in the matrix will directly say not supported. But LVM with NVMe OF should also test that and be added once the fix merges.
Okay.
So the thing is that we will need different, which I think is part of what you were asking. We will need to have different lines for LVM with iSCSI and LVM with NVMe OF, because they are completely different transport protocols. So 2 different lines for LVM in the matrix.
Had a point regarding this, so we know that in future we will have a job. I think we are good with this topic. Any other points or comments? Yes. Then moving on. So before the PTG, I noticed two bugs that were marked under security vulnerability, and I created a Google Doc for them. But later, I think I discussed this with Brian also, but they were marked public, so I thought we can see them in an Etherpad as well and discuss it normally without like, a separate core meeting, a security group meeting. So if you go to the Etherpad, I have mentioned two launchpad bugs. First one is on line 5, which I have taken a look at and added some points to the Etherpad. Is majorly NFS related, but I will give some time for everyone to take a look. So I will also just summarize this issue since I've worked on it before. So basically the operation flow is when you create an NFS volume and attach it to an instance, then you create a snapshot of it and you delete the snapshot. Then there is this operation called block rebase where your actual volume file moves into the snapshot file. So NFS keeps track of volumes as files like volume, volume ID, and snapshots as volume, volume ID dot snap, snap ID, like this. So when the volume file merges into the snapshot file, then Cinder loses track of that volume. And when you detach that volume and try to extend or perform any operation on it, then NFS throws this error that it is not able to find that volume file.
So this is NFS. Sorry, this is NFS specific as far as you can tell.
Yeah, this is NFS specific, and I've worked on this before. I proposed a patch as well. So Cinder, in Cinder NFS, we have this file, this info file, which keeps track of all the snapshots, but it doesn't keep track of the original volume file. So I added support to keep the track of original volume file name as well. Like the volume ID is the key and the volume file name is the value. So when it changes after that operation on the Nova side, then we update it on the Cinder side as well. So
how are you handling the case where for all files that don't have the information in there?
sorry, I didn't get your.
Yeah, if I understand correctly, you are adding new data to volume.info, right? With the original volume name, you said, right?
In the info file, I'm adding a new field for the volume detail, like the volume file.
And does your patch support all volumes? I mean, I understand that if you create a new file right now with your patch, it will add the information, this new information, that file, right?
Do you mean creating a volume file? Like when I create a volume, well, the information. So every volume has different files, this info files. So it's just to keep track of all the snapshots that a volume has. It didn't account for the volume file initially, so I'm just adding that information. But for every volume file, there is this new info file created.
So the info file didn't exist before, or it did with a snapshot?
It did exist before.
Okay, so it did exist, but it didn't have the volume name in it. Only was tracking the snapshot.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Now, the thing is that you want Nova to update it, or it is going to be Cinder the one updating the information?
It's going to be updated on the sender side. So this snapshot delete operation, when we perform it and the volume is attached, then we perform it on the Nova side, but sender initiates it. So sender does some things, then calls Nova, and after that does some other things. So after the snapshot is deleted from the Nova side, then we update this file on the sender side.
Okay, couple of questions. Do we have a lock on that file? Yes, we do. I see the delete volume. There is a lock. Okay, perfect. And I'm trying to, okay, yeah, I think I kind of understand. I'm not sure if, when you say you update that information, you update, and if it was not even there because this is an old volume, then you just add the information.
Yeah,
right?
I add or update the information.
What will happen if the Nova to Cinder communication breaks? Because Nova is the one doing the operation.
So this operation is performed on the sender side because we delete a snapshot, but since the volume is attached, Nova is going to delete that. But the
So we make a
operation is
call
initiated.
to Nova.
Yeah, and if Nova doesn't reply, then we don't create this new entry here.
That's the thing. And what happens if the network communication with Nova fails? But it actually does the operation, completes the operation.
Nova has deleted the file, but it's not updated. But Cinder doesn't know about it.
Exactly, because we have a network timeout, we don't hear back, whatever. We probably need to somehow reflect the fact that we are working on the deletion. You know, before calling Nova, you say we have to somewhere that we can recover later, store and say we're going to call Nova to delete this thing. And we call Nova and we don't hear back, we fail. But at some point we have to double check, did Nova delete it? Is Nova still working on it? Some way to double check if it actually failed and didn't do anything, it's an in progress operation, or if it completed successful. I'm not saying that we need to add it in this patch, but at least a to-do note reflecting that that is a potential problem that we need to figure out.
Okay.
Because this is something that we have all over the Cinder code in general, so this is not specific to the patch. We tend to assume that everything is going to be fine. We make a call to Nova. Yeah, sure, that is always going to succeed or fail, or and everything is going fine, and we assume that everything is serial. But what if your Cinder dies in that operation? You don't know how we leave it. That we have it all over the place, and I think in this case it's more dangerous, probably.
Yeah, in that case, the file is out of sync, and I understand the concern. I will try to look into that and try to come up with a solution.
Yeah, if it's something that you can find a solution in this initial patch, perfect. If not, we can just leave it as a potential problem. A to-do note and maybe a launchpad bug reflecting that the initial fix does not cover that corner case. Because definitely it's better to fix the common case where there are no problems. At least we need to fix that one.
The discussions around points around this. Having the concern regarding this bug in the meeting notes. Any other points on this? Just one more thing regarding this. So, like it was initially marked as public security. So, because the initial reporter thought that their volume is gone missing, but it actually exists, just the file name is different. So I have added a comment there, and Jeremy Stanley, I think, marked it as a public bug. So I think it's not a security vulnerability.
I kind of agree with you on that.
Yeah, is everybody clear here on the workflow for the security bugs? I'll just say it real quick. So if you find something that you think is a security bug, you're supposed to file it in Launchpad, and there's a place where you can make it. I think it says security, actually. It's been a while since I did this. And then what happens is we've got Launchpad set up so that the security vulnerability team gets a look at it first. So none of us would actually see it yet. And then what they do is do an initial triage to see if it's, makes sense as a security bug. And if so, they make it available to the Cinder core security team. And then we're supposed to address it within 90 days, I think is the thing. Otherwise, they will just make it public because I think people should know about it. So while it's still private, we're supposed to not talk about it publicly, and it's supposed to be reviewed on the security patch, which is an enormous pain in the butt because you got to keep posting patches on there and then downloading them and reviewing them. And then if the security, the Cinder security cores think it's not a vulnerability that needs to be dealt with privately, then we can make it public right away. And then that way it opens up the community of people who could address it and fix it. That's basically what's going on.
And going through the workflow of it.
Yeah, and just one other thing. The reason why the core security team is small is because the OpenStack wide vulnerability management team wants it that way. I think they don't like it to be more than like 4 or possibly 5 people, because the more people who know about it, the more likely it is something's going to leak or somebody's going to say something in IRC by mistake. So that's why it's been like that.
In the case of these bugs, these are already marked public security, so can publicly discuss them. One of them is even not marked as security now. So going to the other one. So the query that I wrote up for, like, it checks security issues, but since first one was marked as not a security issue, it isn't showing up in the query. The second one will do. So that query can be used for when new bugs can be reported as well. So the second one is regarding the password details. So in the attachment show command, we also return the connection info, which sometimes contains the password of certain drivers. I'm not sure if it's the case with everyone, but I think the initial reports of LVM or RBD shows that they are, maybe not RBD, but LVM, it shows that there is password in the connection info.
That is okay. Sorry to interrupt you, but the thing is that unless your backend uses a global user and password, then it is okay, because that username and that password is specific for the user that created the connection. So in terms of username and password, That's the reason why the RBD driver stopped sending the information through there, because it was for the whole cluster, or at least for the pool. So the user could actually attach, say, I want to attach a volume. Then he was able, or she was able to request the connection information. And with that connection information, that person could touch anybody's volume. That is why it was a vulnerability and it was removed. But for LVM, for example, LVM creates one, how do we say it? One target per volume, and the username and password is specific for that one. So if I create a volume, I ask to get it exported and mapped and everything, the username and password is useless for anything else. So I don't, that in terms of security, I don't think it's a problem. The problem, I think that we probably agree that maybe problematic for users is that they can see your internal IPs and things like that. Because the addressing that appears there, the HPI addresses, the IP addresses, everything for the connection information is of your data network, which usually is not exposed to end users. So that part is probably kind of exposing information that shouldn't be, or that an admin may not want to get at.
Okay. But if I remember correctly, we had an issue with Scale.io, which has been renamed quite a few times. So they also had this issue where they were passing this password information, and that was also again registered as a security issue. And then we had to create a XML file, I think, on the OSBit side, which contained all the passwords because they were sending through this. So,
but if I remember correctly, it was the same case as RBD, which is it's for the whole pool. It's not
that was
per volume per user. It's with those credentials, you can touch any volume from any tenant or project. And that is the security vulnerability. That I, as a user, can get a password that allows me to touch anybody's volumes or somebody else's volume. And that is the vulnerability there. Not that I can access my own volumes. That's fine. We don't care. If you want to destroy your data, read it again, that's fine. So that's, and the Scale.io did the same as RBD did, which is you have to put the files. I don't care how you put your files in the Nova compute, but it's not Cinder's responsibility, and Cinder should never pass in the connection information global username and password.
Yeah, but we fixed it for RBD, we fixed it for Scale.io, but again, this could happen for any driver. And in general, like if we stop reporting, as you also mentioned, like the connection info is the data plane the attributes, and we should not be exposing that to end users. So if we could just directly block the connection info, this would solve the issue for most of the drivers, like in a general case.
Well, I would say that it's slightly different because we should add in our interface file to that method, be very, very specific about the requirements they should follow to be secure. Don't use global configure the username and password. And if you use it, don't pass it don't put it here. Don't export and map volumes without restrictions. For example, LVM with NVMe exposes the volume so that anybody can access it. That is not production ready. That's not secure. It should use some kind of username and password so that others cannot access. So we should document those kind of rules in terms of username and password, because we may not, even with the solution that is being proposed with policies, it is a different thing to be able to, as an admin of the system, as a system administrator, I may know about the networks because I'm managing my host, so I know about the network addressing system. But I may not have, or should not, maybe have access to the username and password of the array. I don't know. Some companies have this separated. The management of the array from OpenStack. So the global username and password, we should document it. That's a no-go. And the other, it's probably probably the good solution, the policies.
So I assume we don't currently have a document regarding the security issues regarding the information at a point.
And one thing that I'm wondering now, thinking about the policies, because I have to admit I got a bit lost with the whole roles of the secure back. They have been changing. So there, I don't know if we have a distinction between, because if I remember correctly, a normal system admin should not be able to access the data or delete volumes for a specific user, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, the system admin would not, but the project admin would.
Okay, so as a system admin, I should not be able to see the password and username in the connection information. Because otherwise, as a system admin, I can connect to that volume.
But, right. Although I probably should be able to see like the IP addresses and stuff because.
Exactly.
And then the other thing is I don't think Walt's here because Walt always has some good cases about this because he uses the what's it called, the OS Brick Cinder client extension to do weird mounts of stuff. So he has some use cases where an end user would actually need the full connection info to do the connections. So I guess we can just open those up
that
to the people who need
that
it.
would be acceptable in the policy. If you can set up the policy, you say, in my deployment, this is allowed, or for this specific user, it is allowed.
Yeah.
So the policies would solve that problem. The problem that I think requires a little bit more thought is that it's not the granularity of how the connection information has different levels. You cannot see it. You can see the infrastructure information from the connection info, and you can see everything, including username and passwords. And that's painful. Have that granularity, I think, that extra granularity I'm describing.
And where does the attachment show fit in the policy matrix? Like, I think we have updated that. So do you remember? Take a look later.
I'll look while we continue talking because I don't remember.
And I'm thinking, so this is interesting. If in attachment show, I cannot see it, I probably should not be allowed to do an update or a create. Because what's the point of creating an attachment if I cannot see the information to use it?
But again, every attachment belongs to a volume, and a volume belongs to a particular project. So indirectly, attachment comes under the attachment operations should all be projects.
Yes, the attachment operations are project scoped, but if I am a user and I am creating, so the problem as I see it is when a user asks to attach a volume, they don't ask Cinder, they ask Nova. The Nova would need to tell us, I am Nova, but I am making this request on behalf of this user. So even though the user that may not have access to a connection information, I am a service and I need it. I need the access to that information. I don't know if we are just going to say service roles can do anything and we don't even check the project they are asking about, or if we are going to do it right and they have to provide both credentials, the user one and the service one, like a token from the service in the token the user used. So we are sure that nobody is actually impersonating, because otherwise, if you get the service credentials, you can do anything. And probably that, in terms of security, that is not correct.
But can we get the service role to any? Like, can I create a user and provide the service role? I don't think that should be possible.
No, that's not. Sorry if I'm explaining it incorrectly. Okay, I think at some point it was discussed that service roles were going to be a thing, because there are times where Nova has to make calls to Cinder. Okay, so now the question is, a service role, what can it do? Can it do anything on any project? So it's kind of like a god, it can do anything. Then it's a security hole, because anybody with those username and password can do anything on anywhere. And if they cannot do anything at that level, they just can see extra stuff, for example, this connection information, then that's probably funny, because they have to say, tell us, I am the Nova service, this is my token, so that you can confirm that I am who I told you that I am. And this is the user that I am acting on behalf of. And this is their token, the user token. Because without the user token, we are again into being able to do anything on any user. That way, all Nova or a service would only be able to act on behalf of a user upon a specific user request, not at any point in time. And that brings another problem. If an operation takes forever, the token may expire. So we could get a service request saying, I am acting on behalf of this user, and the user token has already expired because it was a long life migration. For example, life migration, very, very long, so the user token has expired. I have no idea what is the mechanism that it's supposed to go there. And I think the roles will depend a bit on that, right? Depends on who is going to make the request to Cinder for the connection information.
Yeah, and I'm not sure exactly what the service stuff has been held up, but it was originally not going to be a dual token kind of thing. which would be
So it
not
was
good.
to be superpowers, right?
It was going to be, yeah, superpowers, but not quite an admin because it would only be like superpowers with respect to attachments. But like you're saying, I mean, superpowers only with respect to attachments is still kind of bad.
Yeah, and probably it's not only attachments. There are other operations that they have to act on behalf of users, like finish a migration.
Yeah. Yeah, so the long running process stuff is there's a current mechanism for that, but it's handled by the middleware. So if you so you have to set up the services correctly, and then the middleware will send a service, send some kind of service credential to Keystone, and then Keystone can be set up to go ahead and return OK for an expired token if you've configured it that way. But that's sort of been there. I think the problem right now is that Keystone has not a lot of people working on it. So they're been a little resistant to changing the way the tokens get sent to do the actual service thing. So I'm not sure what's going to happen there.
So let's assume that what we currently have is what we're going to have, which is a service token of that kind. But in that case, is it a service token or is it a user token what we get from NOAA?
I think it would probably be, actually, I don't know. I'll have to go look. I'm not sure.
So this service token, I think it is postponed to maybe BB because we are going to implement the manager role first. I saw the spec has merged, but not sure we are going to implement which one first because this service role, the spec is also in review on Keystone side. Last I checked.
I think we can probably go the route to not go crazy like it was going and just say we have a policy whether connection info is shown or not, and we defaulted to the user be able to use it in Nova, be able to see it, and anybody that thinks this is a security risk for them, that they want to hide the connection info, they just remove so that the user cannot see it, and only Nova and Glance can see it. And we don't add extra granularity to the connection information. From the user password and the other, it's all one thing. Otherwise, it's going to be too much work to add that extra granularity for little benefit.
So to summarize, that we won't be blocking this connection information from Cinder side, but rather tell driver maintainers that they should not expose certain details in the connection information.
I think the proposal that speaks in line 12, the proposed solution is to introduce a new attachment get policies. And I think that is the solution. But it's not for the username and password only. It's because the other information is also sensitive. And like it says, we just define it so that current behavior works and there is no change. If the users can now see it, they will still be able to see it. But with the new policy, an admin can now disable it. the possibility of a normal user sync. Because otherwise, yeah, sorry.
I had a question regarding this. So if we keep this as an admin only API, like currently I think any end user can see this attachments, the attachment details. But if we set it to admin, will it affect, like I'm not sure how Nova calls Cinder at this point currently. So will the admin change?
That's why I'm saying that by default, the default, once we add the policy, is to do what we are doing now. An admin can see it. A project, an owner can also see it. We don't change it. So at some point, when we have this service policy, or if there is some mechanism that we add between Nova and Cinder, the policy, a system admin can change the behavior so that only Nova can see it. But for now, extra policy, we just add the foundation to be able to hide it in the future, basically. Because right now, if Nova is calling us with the user credentials, then we have to keep letting users see it until we have services. But if we add the policy, then once we have service tokens, service roles, it's very easy to say service and user, and any deployer that don't want their users seeing it, just make this change.
So for the current case, like without the service role, if a operator wants to change this policy, then they should also change the Nova configurations to adapt accordingly. Like it's their responsibility to make the changes on either end.
And I don't even know if there is a change possible in a Nova config to actually make it happen. That's why I'm thinking that this is mostly the foundation, so that when the rest of the work is done, it's very easy to just fix, well, have the feature enabled.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Gorka's right about this. There's no way for us to tell right now whether a request from Nova is Nova asking to do something special or just the regular user request. Because I think we just get the user token. So, and I think the holdup with the service role is exactly what Gorka outlined. That the proposal to just make a request with the service role and not having also an authenticated user is a big problem. So that's sort of up in the air still. But I think the other thing is, I don't know how strong a statement I should make. I believe that most of the drivers, so I think the drivers that were exposing global credentials in connection info have fixed that, or at least probably more accurately. So I think for the major drivers that are used by a lot of people, somebody would have noticed at some point and reported it. And so I think the Scale IO is the last one that we had to stamp out. It's possible there could be somebody else, but I don't think so. So I think in terms of exposing credentials in this call, we're okay. We're down to the infrastructure, being able to find out some IPs, but also, I guess, reveal some information about the underlying deployment that somebody could use to nefarious purposes if they were creative about it.
I can add the part of the interface at the description of the connection information, how a driver should, at the bare minimum, protect that. Even if the connection information is exposed, this is not a security risk.
Right, because I think most of them are using CHAP, which would handle this automatically, right?
Yeah, but some of them are just presenting the volumes. You want it mapped down. And for example, the case of the NVMe driver, basically you don't need credentials and you can access from any IP address. You can imagine somebody using LVM with NVMe would assume that there is some kind of restriction, but there is none. iSCSI has it, but not NVMe. NVMe says anybody can access, there is no credential. Good to go. So anybody with that connection information can probably access other volumes. So yeah, and in any case, even if we don't have any driver that it's doing it wrong today, it is good to spell it out so that somebody working on this doesn't forget, because usually I think one of the problems that vendors have when they start working on a driver is that it's a lot of things. There are too many things to think. So somebody's going to go to fall through the cracks because it's a huge endeavor to actually develop a driver. So the more things that are spelled out, the easier for them to have a checklist. In this method, I have to remember to do this, 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 and not do this.
As Volker pointed out, it's not a harm to document this and will be good from a documentation perspective. So I've added one action item regarding the documentation of this and other action item to add the new policy, which I think I probably have a patch for I proposed long ago. I will just update that with the new RBAC personas. Yeah, that's assigned to me. So any other doubts, concern regarding these issues? So the second one is actually a security vulnerability, right? As we'll see.
The second one, I don't think it's a security vulnerability with our current drivers. It's the term security vulnerability means it's a strong word, and in this case, you're just exposing some information from your infrastructure. It's not ideal, but you cannot access with that any data that you should not be able to. So I would not put the flag of security. It's security related, you could say, but vulnerability, I would only put it as security vulnerability if we were still passing global credentials in there.
So, and there is another action item to add a comment to the BZ describing this. So, would you like to do it, or should I add that comment? Or if you said anything, I didn't hear anything. Thanks for discussing these. I think these are not security issues, but we certainly have some work items from the discussion of works. The next topic is regarding spec review. So my idea was if someone has any doubts or any concerns regarding any of the spec, or if anyone wants to highlight their spec. I might have not added all the specs. I have looked into the Cinder specs directory, and the ones which I saw were discussed during the ZPTG. I've added that. If any spec is missing, then you can add that. And I've tried to review some of the specs. I think the secure RBAC and the capacity factor reporting. I have viewed those. The image encryption one is already merged. Sorry, I should have gone in the sequence. So the first one I'm not too sure about. Maybe it's adding a task field as we have in Nova that tells uh, the current, it tells the whole stack trace of how that error occurred and all the details around the failing of it. The author is there, they can describe better than me. Here, I have a -1 from Walter on it. Others can review as well. I don't think we have much information, or we discussed this during the PTG as well. So the second one is image encryption, which I think was discussed, but it's still held up on the Barbican side. There is still work to be done on the Barbican side for this to work, and then we have to make changes on Nova, Glance, and Cinder side, which majorly the changes are on Glance side, and on Nova and Cinder side it is to adapt to those changes, the image encryption on the Glance
Although
side. So
the actual encryption code is an OS brick, so we do have something to do there. So there's a patch up. I'll put a link here, but that's just the other. But the actual the Cinder side stuff should be pretty minimal.
do we have a status on it, like if this Barbican work is going to be done? Since we already have approved the spec, are we going to have work in this cycle, or
I believe there's actually a patch up in Barbican, but I don't know the status of it. So I think it's actually going to happen during Z. But yeah, so I think so. It is worth doing the. I think the way we should prioritize Brick is to finish getting Gorka's NVMe OF stuff in, so we can address our known issues, and then it would be good to get this stuff reviewed, which I haven't done yet, I admit. But it's got tests, I believe, and it's been rebased. So I'll get the link in a second.
yeah, thanks, man. So maybe we can
Talking
delay
about
this.
NVMe, I need to rebase my patches on top of the multipath that I have already reviewed and has a +2 from me. I have tested that one, and I think we should probably get that merged. I don't want to rebase all my patches on top of that before it gets merged because it's a lot of work. But I think we should review that multipath phase 1 patch. Just needs another +2.
I will take a note to that. I think at least the encryption one is merged. The issue related with the FIPS one. Okay, so for this encryption, image encryption part, I think we can delay that and focus more on the NVMe of patches for now. The spec is posed by Walter. He's not around today, but I think his idea is to report certain other uh, attributes with the get pools API. So I reviewed that patch and I found uh, some parameters to be redundant, which we are already reporting in the capabilities. Others can take a look. It's similarly an API side change where we'll be exposing more details with the get pools API. Next one is about S-Secure RBAC, which I think Brian has proposed. I reviewed that as well. I think Brian, the directory needs to be changed. It still shows yoga.
Yeah, I had left it in Yoga so that you could do because I thought this might be wrong. I thought if I move the file to Z, you don't get the diff with it being in Yoga. But I think at this point, everybody who wants to read it has read it. So I'll update it with your comments and move it. And then I can ask for one last round of reviews at the next Cinder meeting. So,
Yeah, I'm still reviewing it myself. I haven't found anything significant, but I should be able to wrap up my stuff by today.
Oh, okay. All right. Then I'll wait till tomorrow to do anything.
One other comment I had is regarding the volume information. That is, since we are implementing the system admin role, then where will that host information will fall? Like, will the project admin will be able to see the host information anymore? Or if not, then how will a system admin will see that?
Yeah, let me. I think we decided it was okay to expose that. But let me. I'll answer on the patch.
Yeah, I think these are two of my comments when I reviewed it. Other than that, it looks fine. So the last one is regarding the new quota system, which Gorka has wrote a comment that he will update. I think it still has to be updated with the discussions we did during the ZPTG.
Yeah, apologies. I keep dragging myself into rabbit holes, and I don't know. Yeah, I haven't had time. My latest rabbit hole is their backup memory thing.
We'll have time till the spec freeze. I think it's June 24th. But could we get good to wrap up all the specs as early as possible? These are the specs that I found out. If I missed anything in the Cinder specs, or if any author is present, they can add their spec. As far as I see, these were the only ones that were proposed after that discussion. So these are to be prioritized as of now. Any other comments on the spec review? Okay. So in general, just the specs, since this is the closest deadline, like the next deadline I think is spec freeze, so we need to get them in. And after that, we also need to merge the drivers, but it still has time. Like the spec freeze is earlier than milestone 2. Moving on. The next topic is regarding the deprecation of Cinder CLI, but Stephen Finucane added this patch since he has been working on a lot of commands on OpenStack client side to like reduce the feature parity between Cinder client and OpenStack client. So he proposed this patch to deprecate Cinder client, and we had a discussion around this, and I added a comment summarizing all of our discussions, to which there is a discussion in the patch, but I asked Stephen to join us at the Midcycle, but I think he's busy with the summit. He had some conflicts there, and I pinged him today morning, like my morning, and right now as well, in 20 minutes ago, and he's not available, so I'm not sure if it's valuable to conduct that discussion.
Yeah, I think let's postpone it either to the next mid-cycle, or we could do like a special purpose meeting just to have a first pass at what the problems are so we can attack them. But yeah, let's move on to the next thing.
Sounds good. Or we could also discuss in a Cinder video meeting, kind of earning. Okay, we will skip this one and move on to the next topic, which is remove of libcgroups v1 code, and I think it's added by Brian.
This one's John Bernard.
Did I not put my? I didn't. Damn it. All right. Whoops. Anyway, so libcgroup. I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with it, but I'll try to provide a brief summary. Thank you. So we're using libcgroup specifically to provide IO throttling resource limits for driver backends, only for operations that happen on the sender volume node, and so libcgroup is both being deprecated and not packaged, at least for Red Hat, and also uses the old V1 API and isn't going to be updated to support V2. And so we're faced with making the transition pretty soon. Debian has already removed V1 completely. It's not even available through kernel options. So it's expected that Ubuntu will follow suit soon, which means that I don't think we have any gate jobs that would actually hit this, but I assume some people are using this somewhere, and it's gonna start really breaking. And so the first question is, this code was all added before we used containers, and we set resource limits for CPU memory and IO bandwidth on containers. It's one of the distinct benefits of deploying them in that way. And so is having Cinder containing cgroup throttling logic just redundant at this point? Can we remove it and allow either the deployer or the admin to apply the limits that they would expect to apply on the container, which I think is what people that are familiar with containers would expect. I don't think they would expect to have Cinder within the container also creating and manipulating cgroups. That seems weird to me, but I'm actually glad Alan's here because I know a lot of people have experience with this, but Alan I know has distinct experience with the deployment and how the containers work and what a deployer might expect. And so, Alan, your input on that would be helpful. Can we
is it acceptable if we're deploying Cinder in containers now? In fact, I don't think we even support not deploying these things in containers moving forward. Can we just remove the cgroup code and use cgroups on the container to achieve the same effect?
Well, unfortunately, I can't answer the question just because the aspect of the deployment tooling I work with doesn't get into that level of detail. Sorry to punt, but
no worries.
I mean, I can try looking further into it, but I don't have any immediate response.
We could ask on the I mean, there is no special operators list, but we could send something to the mailing list with this proposal, because I think my impression is that it's not widely used, the Cinder specific throttling. And I think your intuition is correct that if people are deploying mostly in containers, then they expect to set the stuff on the container and have it behave the way they've set it. And it would just be an extra layer of that they're not going to want to bother with. And possibly if somebody did set it, it would screw everything up that they're trying to achieve with containerization anyway.
In the worst case, it'd be something like nested quotas, where what you get and the complexity of the configuration is something that you can't just easily visualize in your mind. And so it also gives us an opportunity to remove a significant amount of code, which, is always a good thing, but not in and of itself worth, removing the feature. But yeah, I think it's accurate to say that at least for as a Red Hat employee, our deployer only supports containers and isn't going to ever go back to supporting deploying Cinder on the metal directly, as it did at one time. So I think it's a fair question to ask. And before I start, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. The problem I see is that is not whether this could be done by the deployment tool, but the fact that currently it cannot do it. So until we have parity between what the deployment tool can do and the feature that we are removing, we are basically creating a gap in the feature. Because if the director on OO cannot do it, and we remove the feature, now we have effectively removed the possibility of doing it. So until director can do it, or director or whatever deployment tool is out there, we cannot remove it. Because this is the only way to do it.
Is it the case that OO cannot apply any sorts of resource limitations to any of the containers it deploys? So,
essentially correct. Yeah, currently there's nothing that I'm aware of, certainly in Cinder, where you can configure any kind of resource limits on the container.
Okay, well then, so
there's no precedence for doing that currently.
Well, so is the effort better spent in putting this into Cinder, in the V2 way, or is the effort better spent proposing a patch to OO to allow resource limits for containers at deploy time?
Well, we would have to check all the deployment tools because we also have Cola. And I don't know if, the OpenStack community also uses Cola. There is Ansible tools to deploy things. So we have to figure out what they're doing, because maybe Cola is already supporting it. I don't know. If they already support it, one less problem we have to worry about. But if there are 3 or 4 deployment tools, even if we add it just to the director, we still have 3 problems we have to worry about.
Okay, so I've got at least one action item of a mailing list thread just to get the discussion going about the various deployment utilities and what they are capable of and the direction they're moving towards in the future and whether or not they even think this is going to happen. So then the second question is, given that we don't support it and won't support it in the short and midterm, we're going to have to do something. And so right now we support per backend different IO limits per backend. Does anyone? So all of this could be greatly simplified if we just allowed a single limiting value for the Cinder service, like the parent, and then allow all of the children, all of the backends to inherit that limit. Is that sufficient, or do we want to keep this logic of allowing you to define backend specific limits where, if you have 5 backends, you could potentially have all 5 of them with different cgroup IO limits?
I think this is where we would need actual operators to know what they are willing to do, because I can see in my mind cases where it makes sense have each different backend with different limits, but that is theoretically. So we go back to, theory is fine. Having this per backend is really nice and whatever, but is anybody using it? Will anybody ever use it?
So is it sufficient to say the feedback I get on the OpenStack mailing list will be representative of the operators that would be interested in? How do I actually go about determining that operators have weighed in and it's a thumbs up or thumbs down? Like, what's the actionable thing there?
It's mostly impossible. I can tell you from the last effort that Brian did to get information from quotas, which is a problem that everybody faces and that everybody complains about. Cinder quotas are terrible. And I think we had like 10, 12 people respond.
I think it was
and
9.
it went for months. 9.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what I think I'm hearing, and jump in if this doesn't sound consistent, is that we need to update to V2. We need to leave libcgroup behind and do something more modern, and we need to keep the per backend logic as we have it now to prevent gaps and prevent operators that aren't going to be on the mailing list that otherwise aren't vocal from being upset when they deploy the next version and find out their cgroup's behavior has changed. Is that a fair assessment of the situation?
I would say in my mind, there are 2 options. The one you're saying, which is basically keep the current support, but with cgroups V2, or throw everything away and say this is no longer supported. I
so
would
related
not
to
go.
Point number 2.
Yeah, okay.
I have to bring this up because it's worth mentioning. The reason, a distinct reason that V2 was created and that V1 wasn't just iterated on or extended was because the different limiting groups don't have knowledge of each other in V1. And so, for instance, the IO subsystem, you can apply IO limits, but if those IO operations are serviced from the page cache, which exists in the memory cgroup, it has no knowledge of the cgroup limits that are applied to the IO subsystem. So if you have an entirety of a volume or even a significant amount of a block device cached, you will fly right past your IO limits. And so it doesn't really work. It kind of works if you don't lean on it too much. And so basically what I'm getting at is if you're using V1, it doesn't really do what it's advertised to do. And so no one has complained about that ever that I'm aware of, because I went back on the mailing list and I didn't see anything. So it leads me to wonder, is anyone using this at all? And do we want to continue to carry this forward into V2, or do we want to just? So an alternative would be, if we don't want to do per backend IO limits, we can launch Cinder with a systemd service and a slice that applies the limits at process launch time. And so that's a very simple solution. We can get rid of all of the Python code, put the whole thing in a cgroup and be done. And
So
then go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So that would apply to each of the Cinder volume services that we're running. They could have their own.
Yeah, yeah. You say I want to launch this parent process Cinder volume, and I want it in this C group with these parameters, and that's done outside of the. You can do that outside of the code. I mean, to be fair, you can let Cinder volume run and then put a child process in a C group and then apply limits to it from outside, from a you know from not within the process. There's a lot of ways to manipulate it, but that would be one simple way to achieve IO limiting. It would be coarser grained, but it would be existent, and it would be using V2, which would be actually doing what it's supposed to do.
Well, and you
And
can
it would.
fine grain it by using a separate Cinder volume service for each of the backends where you want to have different
Oh,
right things
yes,
run.
absolutely. Yeah, if you want to slice it that way, you certainly you could get per backend limits that way.
So yeah, so my feeling is
Well, just to
so
weigh in quickly,
oh
Triple O
sure.
doesn't do any of this. So yeah, it all could be done, but it currently isn't being done. So
Well, but this would be right. The system
And
D slice thing would be initiated by Cinder.
but
It
no,
would just be the way that
No.
Cinder volume is started in the container, which
Oh,
contains system D. So um,
and
it would be
one more
one.
thing. Yeah, sorry, finish, John.
No, go ahead. What do you got?
Just wanted to mention that if we are going to be thinking about limiting it that way, we may have to do something that I was considering, which is when Cinder starts, it always forks. So it has a parent process, and even when it only has one backend, it forks into it. So for a single backend, it's not the most efficient use of resources because you start having just an additional process that's nothing just because of it. So if we start doing this, it would not be great either. Because for 3 backends, you end up with 6 processes.
No. Oh, you mean if we said this is the new way to get per backend limits that are different.
Yep.
If you want different per
Yep.
backend limits, I don't know. Yeah, the cost of an idle
No,
process.
it's just, it's a node. It's a node that
Yeah,
if we
yeah.
go that route, then we have to explore something that I was already considering. And it would, for me, it would be great because it gives more reason for the community to accept something I want to do. So,
Yeah, I mean, I guess to boil it down, we have to have C group logic in our Cinder code if we want to manage the C groups ourselves. If we want to start up and fork our own children with for different backends, and we want to manipulate those C groups from within the Cinder code, we have to maintain this. We don't. That isn't a strict requirement. There are a few ways to achieve that effect without carrying that logic in our code base. And I guess I'm trying to get at what is the desire to keep carrying this versus relying on the layer above to do this. I think if we were starting clean, or we had if we had like Triple O developers here and our momentum was our speed of development was a bit higher, I think we would say, well, we do this on the container and be done with it. But pragmatically, I don't think that's reasonable. So what do we
and
want to
there's
do?
another case that we have to consider that if these are Cinder configuration parameters, drivers like RPD, which don't go through the specific disk per se, and use libradius or librd or whatever to access the volume, they can actually create a mechanism to do the throttling. Because, for example, there are open bags saying that the RPD export operations in their volume, they don't support throttling. So
right, yeah, because the I/O isn't actually happening in a process on the Cinder volume node, and that's going to be the case with most enterprise backends. It's only the operations where the Cinder volume is actually operating on volume data and actually connects the volume to it and does something, which is, you could argue that
Most
we're
of the
doing.
drivers. Most of the drivers do that. We do a local attachment, so that's fine, right?
Okay.
But what I'm trying to get is that if this is managed outside the container level as a slice in the system D, then we have no way of telling a driver like RBD in Cinder how to limit things because we don't have it, right? That mechanism.
That's a fair point. Yep. Yeah, I mean, you can query your limits. Like our driver could quickly determine what the limits are and then apply those in an RBD specific way. Although that's kind of heinous. I don't know. Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing is let's migrate to V2. You know,
Truth be told, I think it's a nice feature to have to say that we are able to do this. But that is from the marketing point of view, let's say. Hey, Cinder has all these features. Oh, cool. But in reality, like you said, probably nobody's using it. So
yeah, I don't have an answer for that. Like the can we versus should we? That's kind of what I was hoping to get out of this discussion is we certainly can. We can do it a lot of different ways, and we can do it in multiple different ways all at the same time. But should we? I'm not crystal clear on that.
Yeah, as far as I know, Thomas Guyrand, who's the packager for Debian, is the only person who's brought this up. And it was because Debian was going to remove all support for cgroup v1, and he saw that he needed to package it with Cinder. But he's been the only one. I'll have to go back and look at what we've said. So we've said in the known issues for like 2 cycles that there was a problem with this. And I guess I was a little optimistic about how we could fix it. So instead of sounding like a warning that this might go away, it says, yeah, we're going to get this fixed eventually. So if it phrased as a warning that we may no longer support this, we might have gotten more response from operators. Yeah, and I don't have a good solution for how we can, I mean, like Gorka said, right? People complain about the quotas, so you'd think if anything would get people's attention, it would be, hey, we're going to fix quotas. Can you give us some information? It only takes 5 minutes, and we got like 9 responses. So,
Just as a side, does Glance support cgroup like throttling for image conversion or anything?
as far as
No
I know,
one.
nothing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then there's a patch up right now to disable conversion on the Cinder volume nodes. So you
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
yeah, so you think if so maybe reach out to Mohammed Nasser and see what his opinion is, because you'd think if it was a big
He's an
problem
operator,
for
is he
him,
not?
yeah. So you'd think if it was a big problem for him, he would have been using the throttling, but he decided he doesn't want to mess with that. He just turned it off. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess coming back, like, I can put the effort in to migrate to V2, but um, is that time well spent? Like, if we do that and no one uses it, and we end up, applying limits to containers in the next whatever the deployment tool or whatever,
Yeah, so we could look at this image conversion disable as sort of like a gap filler, um, and wait for people to scream that. Right. So what we could say is we used to have this throttling, now we have this disabling, so that you have to have stuff in the right format before you start using it. And then if
Well,
people really want the throttling back, so they want to be able to do both have conversion and have throttling, then we could work on re-adding it, or at least or decide the best way to do it, whether it should be pushed off to containers or what. So
I think I need to do something at least because so right now I think we're decorating the so the groups get applied right before the process spawns, and those will call out to the libcgroup executables, which will try to manipulate a C group hierarchy that may not exist, in which case those will fail. And I think the spawning of the processes, i.e. Cinder volume, and the backends will also then fail, and that's not acceptable. So at the very least, if we're going to pause and get feedback, we need to make that not blow up if you're on a distribution where the V1 hierarchy is not available.
yeah, I think maybe because this isn't an API feature or anything, right? So I don't know that we have to worry about deprecation. But what we could do is just remove cgroup v1 support, because most modern operating systems aren't supporting it anymore anyway. If you wanted some type of throttling, we have the image conversion disable that you can use as a stopgap.
But those are different things. Because for DD, if we're doing migrations, retype with migration, that's a DD.
Oh, I see.
Image conversion does nothing on that. So
Yeah,
we have
okay.
many operations where
We can add an option to disable that too as well.
I think it falls back to what
okay.
I said earlier, whether it's worth the effort or whether we just throw it away and in our documentation explain to achieve this feature, use slices. This is the documentation you have to read to do the slices. And if you want one per backend, you need different launch different services with different processes. If you want it per backend limited, so maybe the solution is to drop the feature and say this is for the installer or whatever, and this is the reference you need to look at if you want to keep doing it.
And just one more point I'll add as an engineer. So because libcgroup is not being ported to V2, that means that if we're going to switch from V1 to V2, we're going to have to leave libcgroup behind and do it a more modern way, which means that the code as it's written is largely not going to be reusable. And so that means that the patch will be mostly new code, and we have no coverage for this in our CI as well. That makes me a little bit nervous. I can see the customer reports and the prio cases coming, but I don't know. It's just another point that I was rolling around up there.
Yeah, I think an email message saying we are thinking of doing this, which means that it's going away, and it will depend on the deployment tool. And currently, as far as we know, no tool supports this. So it would be effectively removing the feature.
Well, they should, but yeah, I agree.
Well, yeah. And then maybe see if we get a reaction. If we get a reaction, we may change what we do, but for the time being, I think that would be the most efficient use of our time. Yeah.
Okay, so just to tie it up, then I'm going to send a mail to the list and just explain kind of what I said, and just get a wider audience and some input, and then hopefully from that we'll have the information we need to make a definitive choice on the direction we proceed in.
Yeah, but probably in the email be very explicit that of the path that we have in theory chosen, which is removing it, passing the problem along to someone else, the deployment tool, and that currently no deployment tool has it and probably will not have it for a very ever. So that it's clear that if somebody's using it, they are going to lose it if they don't say anything.
Okay, and then redirect all complaints to Gorka's email address. Got it.
Yep.
Perfect.
Sounds good.
Can do. Thanks.
So as we're done with this discussion for now, and we have also summarized it that the current way to go forward is send an email to operators, asking for their opinions. Uh, and we can probably continue this discussion in a follow-up meeting. We have some responses. So we are towards the end of the mid-cycle. I'm not sure if this, so when, is it a short topic regarding the drivers, or is it going to
Yeah,
be
I mean, it's just we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 new ones proposed. I think so. I've been looking at the data core one. Yadro has been updating theirs, and it's passing Zool now, which is good. I guess I'll take the action item to check on the third-party CI situation for each of these to make sure they've got it documented what CI is being used and that there's somebody there monitoring it. So I'll do that. But I just wanted to. These tend to be, well, the NFS one is pretty small because it's mostly a wrapper, and I think the HPE XP is pretty small. Other than, and maybe the Pure. This might not be as bad. Yadro is big. Data core is big. So just we're going to need to keep that in mind, or in terms of arranging review time. But and I just wanted to. Those are the only ones I know about. So if anybody else has a driver they want to submit, it would be good to let us know, because this is a lot of drivers actually. So that's it.
So I will also look into if there are blueprints registered with these drivers, and if not, I will send out a mail anyway to take a look at their driver patches and see if the corresponding blueprint is registered and if any driver is missing from there. Just I think with this topic we can conclude the mid-cycle. Just stop the
Yeah, I just
recording.
want to point out the review request on line 117. So that's, I think it's fixing service token sending. So sort of connects with something we talked about earlier. But I committed to review it and I haven't yet. So at least one other person needs to.
Yeah, I think Tobias is requesting this since past some weekly meetings as well. So good to look there. Other two topics, I think, Brian, we will have to postpone it to some Cinder meeting, video meeting. We can.
Yeah, they're mostly filler anyway, so don't worry about it.
I will just stop the recording.